The agronomist in the field, you just pick strawberries, Miguel. That's literally all you know how to do. Pick fruit and put it in baskets. You don't understand agriculture. You don't understand farming. You don't understand anything beyond the simple manual labor I pay you minimum wage to perform. Bill Morrison's voice carried across the strawberry fields of his Watsonville, California farm as he gestured dismissively at the Salvadoran crop picker, who D just suggested the irrigation schedule might be creating conditions for fungal growth. I've got agricultural consultants from UC Davis, specialists with PhDs who actually studied farming, telling me what to do with my crops. I do need advice from someone who just picks fruit for a living and probably never finished high school back in El Salvador, okay? What Bill didn't know, what this arrogant third-generation California farmer was too busy dismissing immigrant labor to notice, was that the dumb fruit picker he'd been mocking for months was actually Miguel Ramirez, a master's degree agronomist and agricultural engineer who had managed multi-million-dollar export farms in El Salvador for 15 years. Specializing in tropical fruit disease management and sustainable agriculture practices that exceeded anything Bill's UC Davis specialists understood about Central American agricultural pathogens. And what Bill definitely didn't realize was that in approximately 2 weeks, his entire strawberry crop, worth over $2 million and representing his farm, his entire annual income, would begin showing signs of a mysterious disease that his expensive American agricultural consultants could identify, much less treat. And the only thing standing between Bill and complete financial ruin would be the stupid fruit picker whose expertise in rare fungal pathogens would diagnose the problem in 10 minutes and save Bill's farm from bankruptcy, bro. You see, I was actually in Watsonville that month doing security consultation for several agricultural operations in the area, farms and processing facilities that needed risk assessments for worker safety and product security. I had been visiting Bill Morrison's farm for about a week, observing operations and interviewing staff, which meant I'd deep witnessed his pattern of treating Miguel and other immigrant workers with casual contempt that went beyond normal employer-employee dynamics into something that reflected deep prejudice about education and intelligence. And I noticed Miguel too, because after 40 years watching how people carry themselves, you develop instinct for recognizing when someone's current job doesn't match their actual capabilities. The way Miguel assessed crop health, the questions he asked about pest management, the systematic approach to his work, all suggested substantially more agricultural knowledge than basic fruit picking required. Before I tell you how Bill's crop disease crisis revealed that the dumb picker who never finished high school was actually more qualified to manage his farm than the expensive agricultural consultants he'd hired. Let me ask you something that probably resonates with folks who've worked in agriculture or witnessed how farm owners treat immigrant labor. Have you seen highly educated immigrant agricultural professionals being dismissed as just pickers by farmers who assume manual labor jobs mean lack of education? Drop your city and country in the comments and share stories about agronomists or agricultural engineers you've met working harvest jobs while their credentials go unrecognized. Because what happened on that California strawberry farm is going to show you exactly why assumptions about farm workers, based on their current jobs rather than their actual expertise, can literally cost you millions when crop diseases emerge that only immigrant professionals have experience treating. And hey, before we dive deep into Miguel's story, let me give appreciation to Carlos Mendez from Watsonville, California, and Ana Torres from Salinas, California, who've been consistently engaging with our videos. Carlos, your comment about your father, who was an agricultural engineer in Mexico, but picks lettuce here, really connected with viewers. Ana, appreciate you sharing how your uncle, who managed coffee plantations in Guatemala, works in a nursery because credentials aren't recognized. Y'all keep sharing because these stories remind people that agricultural workers often have more expertise than the farm owners employing them. Now, if you'll pardon an old man for getting comfortable here in this farm office where I'm finishing my security report while the evening crew finishes harvest work. Stories about agricultural professionals reduced to manual labor always hit me hard. At my age, having worked security for agricultural operations, food processing facilities, and everywhere the American food system operates, I've met countless agronomists, agricultural engineers, and farm managers from Latin America who work as crop pickers or packing house laborers, because American farmers won't recognize that education and experience developed. Managing tropical agriculture often exceeds what domestic agricultural specialists understand. Thank you for staying with Uncle Sam as I tell you about one of the most dramatic demonstrations I ever witnessed of why judging farm workers by their current jobs, rather than their actual qualifications, can literally determine whether your farm survives or goes bankrupt when crop diseases strike. To understand how Miguel Ramirez ended up picking strawberries in California. Despite being one of El Salvador's most accomplished agricultural engineers and agronomists, we got to go back about 5 years to when his management position at a major Salvadoran export farm became untenable due to gang violence, targeting agricultural businesses for extortion payments. Miguel had been born in San Salvador in 1978, growing up during El Salvador's civil war in a family that had owned small coffee farms for generations. His father had been a coffee farmer, his mother a teacher, and Miguel had been passionate about agriculture from childhood, the kind of kid who'd experiment with different planting techniques, study soil composition, dream about using science to improve farming yields and sustainability. I grew up understanding that agriculture is both art and science, Miguel had told me during our conversation after saving Bill's crop. My family had grown coffee for 3 generations, but traditional methods weren't sustainable. Soil was depleting. Pests were becoming resistant to pesticides. Climate patterns were changing. I wanted to bring modern agricultural science to El Salvador's farming industry to help farmers increase yields while protecting environmental sustainability. Miguel's agricultural education had been completed at Universidad de El Salvador and then Universidad Nacional de Costa Rica, where he'd earned his master's degree in agronomy with specialization in tropical fruit disease management. His thesis research had focused on fungal pathogens affecting export crops, particularly rare diseases that emerged in Central American agricultural systems and could devastate entire harvests if not quickly identified and treated. Central America has unique agricultural challenges, Miguel had explained. We have tropical climate that creates perfect conditions for fungal growth. We grow export crops that face international phytosanitary standards. We deal with diseases that don't exist in temperate climates like California. I specialized in identifying and treating these rare pathogens because they were the biggest threat to El Salvador's agricultural export industry. By 2015, at age 37, Miguel had been working for 15 years managing export farms in El Salvador that grew strawberries, blueberries, and other high-value crops for North American markets. His expertise in disease management had made him particularly valuable. He successfully identified and treated multiple rare fungal pathogens that would have otherwise destroyed entire harvests worth millions of dollars. His diagnostic skills were so well regarded that other Salvadoran farms would consult him when they encountered mysterious crop diseases their own agronomists could identify. I managed farms worth tens of millions of dollars in export value, Miguel had recalled. These weren't small operations. They were sophisticated agricultural businesses, growing premium fruit for American and European markets under strict quality standards. I oversaw everything from soil management to pest control to harvest logistics. I published papers about sustainable tropical agriculture. I trained other agronomists in disease identification. By El Salvador standards, I'd achieved significant professional success. But El Salvador's gang violence had made managing rural agricultural operations increasingly dangerous. By 2019, MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs had expanded their extortion operations to target farms, demanding regular payments or threatening to destroy crops, harm workers, or kill farm managers who refused to pay. Miguel's farm had received escalating threats over several months. The extortion demand started small, a few $100s monthly, Miguel had explained. But they escalated quickly to thousands per month, with threats that if we didn't pay, they'd poison our crops or attack workers. As farm manager, I was the primary target for intimidation. They made it clear. Either I arranged payments from farm ownership or I'd be killed, as an example. The breaking point had come in early 2020 when gang members had shown up at the farm with weapons, demanding immediate payments and threatening Miguel's life when the farm owners refused to continue paying extortion. Miguel had fled the farm that day, and within a week had made the decision to leave El Salvador entirely rather than continue working under constant death threats. My wife Sofia and our 3 children couldn't live safely in El Salvador while I was targeted by gangs. Miguel had told me I either had to quit agricultural management entirely and lose the career I spent 20 years building, or leave the country and try to practice agronomy somewhere safer. We chose to seek asylum in the United States, hoping my expertise would be valuable here. Miguel, Sofia, and their children, sons Diego, age 14, and Mateo, age 11. Daughter Isabella, age 8, had entered the United States through Mexico in March 2020, requesting asylum based on the documented death threats from criminal organizations. Their asylum application had been filed and was being processed, but that timeline would stretch to over 4 years while they waited for immigration court dates that kept getting delayed. What Miguel discovered was that the United States agricultural system, despite constantly complaining about labor shortages and need for agricultural expertise, made it extraordinarily difficult for foreign agronomists to actually work in their profession. Even when their qualifications and experience exceeded many American agricultural consultants. I have a master's degree in agronomy from accredited Central American universities, Miguel had said. I'm fully credentialed in El Salvador. I have 15 years of farm management experience. I published research on agricultural disease management. But in the United States, my degrees aren't automatically recognized. Agricultural employers want American degrees or extensive experience working in U.S. agricultural systems, which I can't get without someone hiring me first. Even worse, Miguel had continued. My asylum application meant my work authorization was conditional and limited. I could work basic jobs, but professional agricultural positions require background checks and visa status that asylum applicants do and have while cases are pending. So I was stuck, highly qualified agronomist with master's degree, but unable to work in agricultural management while waiting years for my asylum case to be resolved. Miguel's family had settled in Watsonville, California, the heart of strawberry country where hundreds of farms employed thousands of agricultural workers. But the only agricultural work available to someone without proper credentials or finalized immigration status was manual labor, crop picking, harvesting, field work that paid minimum wage and required no verification of professional qualifications. I needed income immediately to support my family, Miguel had explained. Housing in Watsonville is expensive, even for farm workers. My children needed school supplies and basic necessities. The only job available was crop picking. Strawberries during spring and summer, other crops during other seasons. So Miguel Ramirez, master's degree agronomist who'd managed multi-million-dollar export farms, became Miguel the strawberry picker who earned minimum wage doing work that required zero agricultural education. The psychological toll had been crushing. Miguel would work 12-hour days picking strawberries in fields he could have managed better than the people running them, then return home to study agricultural journals and maintain his professional knowledge even though he couldn't legally practice agronomy. He de-watched American farm managers make basic mistakes in pest control or irrigation that he could have corrected immediately. But revealing his expertise would raise questions about why someone with a master's degree was picking fruit. The hardest part wasn't the physical labor or low wages, Miguel had told me. It was having expertise in agricultural science and watching crops being mismanaged by people who assumed that because I picked fruit, I knew nothing about farming. I'd see disease symptoms developing that I recognized immediately from my work in El Salvador. But I couldn't say anything without exposing that I was overqualified for my job, which might complicate my immigration case or get me fired for thinking I knew better than management. I'd been conducting my security assessment at Morrison Farms for about 5 days when I first witnessed the dynamic between Bill Morrison and Miguel Ramirez. Bill was a third-generation strawberry farmer who'd inherited the operation from his grandfather. And he embodied that particular type of agricultural arrogance where inherited wealth and land ownership get confused with agricultural expertise. He treated his farm workers, mostly Latino immigrants, with casual contempt that suggested he viewed them as interchangeable manual labor rather than humans with knowledge and capabilities. Bill's mockery of Miguel had been ongoing for months, according to other farm workers I'd interviewed. It wasn't just normal boss-employee hierarchy. It was deliberate, intellectual dismissal based on assumptions that anyone picking fruit must be uneducated and incapable of understanding agricultural science. Miguel had apparently made the mistake early in his employment of suggesting improvements to farm practices, which had triggered Bill as defensive arrogance about his agricultural knowledge being questioned by just a picker. You just pick strawberries. Miguel, Bill had said during an interaction I'd witnessed on day 3 of my assessment. Miguel had been trying to point out that the irrigation timing might be creating excess moisture that could promote fungal growth. That's literally all you know how to do. Take fruit and put it in baskets. You don't understand agriculture. You don't understand farming. You don't understand anything beyond the simple manual labor I pay you minimum wage to perform. With respect, Mr. Morrison, I do understand agriculture. Miguel had replied carefully, his English accented, but his meaning perfectly clear. In my country, I worked on farms and learned about crop management. The moisture levels in the morning suggest the irrigation schedule might need adjustment to prevent fungal problems. Oh, you worked on farms in El Salvador? Bill had laughed mockingly. So you picked fruit there too? That doesn't make you an agricultural expert, Miguel. I've got agricultural consultants from UC Davis, specialists with PhDs who actually studied farming, telling me what to do with my crops. I don't need advice from someone who just picks fruit for a living and probably never finished high school back in El Salvador. I did finish school, Mr. Morrison, Miguel had said quietly, not elaborating on his master's degree because past experience had taught him that revealing professional credentials while working manual labor created uncomfortable questions. I'm just suggesting that the moisture might cause problems later. Thanks for your concern, Bill had replied with dismissive condescension. But I think I'll trust my actual agricultural experts over picking advice from a fruit picker. Just focus on harvesting and leave the farm management to people who actually understand it. I wanted to intervene to tell Bill he was being ignorant and potentially missing valuable agricultural knowledge. To point out that many immigrant farm workers had more agricultural education than American farm owners assumed. But I learned over decades that entitled people rarely respond well to being corrected by consultants about their treatment of employees. They get defensive, question your qualifications, and usually take their embarrassment out on the workers who caused the confrontation. Instead, I'd approached Miguel later when he'd had a break from picking. That was frustrating to watch. You clearly know more about agriculture than Bill gives you credit for. It happens constantly, Miguel had replied with resigned dignity. American farmers assume that because we pick fruit, we're stupid. They don't consider that many of us managed farms in our countries before coming here. But revealing our education usually just creates problems. Either they don't believe us, or they get angry that someone they pay minimum wage is more educated than they are. What's your actual background? I'd asked, fairly certain I already knew the answer would involve significant agricultural education. Miguel had hesitated, then apparently decided I seemed trustworthy. I have master's degree in agronomy from Costa Rica. 15 years managing export farms in El Salvador, worth millions in annual production. Published research on tropical fruit disease management. But I can't practice agronomy here because my degrees are unrecognized, so status prevents professional employment. So I pick strawberries and watch American farmers make mistakes. I could prevent if anyone would listen to someone who looks like me and works in the fields. That conversation had given me context for understanding what happened about 2 weeks later when Bill Morrison's entire strawberry crop began showing signs of a mysterious disease that would expose exactly how much his dumb picker knew compared to Bill's expensive agricultural consultants. The disease had appeared suddenly across multiple fields, strawberry plants developing unusual wilting, discoloration of leaves, and fruit that looked superficially normal but was developing internal rot that made it unmarketable. Bill had immediately called his UC Davis agricultural consultants, who'd visited the farm, taken samples, and run tests trying to identify the pathogen causing the damage. We're seeing symptoms consistent with fungal infection, one consultant had explained to Bill, while I'd been present conducting follow-up security observations. But we can't identify the specific pathogen. It's not verticillium wilt, not fusarium, not any of the common California strawberry diseases. The symptom pattern is unusual, might be an emerging pathogen we haven't documented in California agriculture yet. What does that mean for my crop? Bill had asked, his voice carrying fear about financial implications. It means we need to send samples to the university test's plant pathology lab for comprehensive analysis. The consultant had replied, that process takes 2 to 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the disease is likely to continue spreading. Based on current progression, you're probably looking at losing 30 to 50% of your crop if we do and identify and treat it quickly. 30 to 50%? Bill's panic had been evident. That's over $1 million in losses. Can't you treat it with something preventive while we wait for identification? We could try broad-spectrum fungicides, the consultant had offered. But without knowing the specific pathogen, we're guessing. Wrong treatment might accelerate the disease or damage the plants further. My recommendation is to wait for lab results before applying anything. But waiting means watching my entire crop die, Bill had protested. There has to be something we can do. The consultants had left promising to expedite the lab analysis, but their uncertainty had been obvious. This was a disease they didn't recognize, couldn't identify from visual symptoms, and had no immediate treatment recommendations for. Bill had been left watching his multi-million-dollar crop deteriorating daily while waiting weeks for lab results that might or might not provide useful answers. By the end of that first week, the disease progression had accelerated dramatically. What had started in a few fields had spread throughout most of Bill's strawberry acreage. The plants were wilting more severely. Fruit production had dropped by 60%, and the strawberries that did develop were showing internal rot that made them unsellable. Bill's projections had shifted from losing $1 million to potentially losing his entire $2 million harvest if the disease wasn't identified and treated immediately. That, as when Miguel had approached Bill with information that would transform the RISIS information Bill had been ignoring for months. Because he de-assumed his dumb picker couldn't possibly know anything valuable about agricultural diseases. Miguel had been working the fields daily, watching the disease progression with growing recognition based on his master's research on tropical fungal pathogens. He finally decided that letting the crop die to avoid revealing his expertise would be worse than speaking up and facing whatever consequences came from Bill learning that his stupid fruit picker was actually more qualified than Bill's agricultural consultants. Mr. Morrison, I need to talk to you about your crop disease, Miguel had said, approaching Bill at the farm office where I had been present, finishing my security report. Not now, Miguel. Bill had replied distractedly, focused on financial projections showing mounting losses. I've got a crisis here. The consultant still can't identify what's killing my strawberries. I can identify it, Miguel had said quietly. I know what disease is killing your crop. Bill had looked up with irritation. Miguel, I appreciate that you're concerned, but I've at UC gave us agricultural specialists who can't identify this disease after a week of testing. You're a fruit picker. I don't mean to be rude, but you're not qualified to diagnose agricultural diseases. Actually, Mr. Morrison, I am qualified, Miguel had replied, his voice carrying quiet authority. I have master's degree in agronomy from Universidad Nacional de Costa Rica. My thesis research was on rare fungal pathogens affecting tropical export crops. For 15 years, I managed farms in El Salvador worth tens of millions in annual production. I've diagnosed and treated dozens of unusual crop diseases, including several that your consultants would not recognize because they don't occur in California agriculture. The silence that had followed Miguel's revelation had been profound. Bill had stared at Miguel with an expression combining shock, disbelief, and dawning recognition that the person he'd been dismissing as uneducated for months might actually have expertise exceeding his hired specialists. You have a master's degree in agronomy? Bill had finally managed. But you pick strawberries. You work minimum wage doing manual labor? If you're that educated, why are you picking fruit? Because I'm asylum applicant from El Salvador, waiting 4 years for my case to be resolved, Miguel had explained. My degrees aren't recognized without expensive American validation I can't afford. Professional agricultural positions require immigration status I don't have while my asylum is pending. So I pick fruit to support my family while my agricultural expertise goes to waste. Because American farmers assume immigrants who do manual labor are stupid. You've been mocking me for months, telling me I don't understand agriculture, dismissing every suggestion I made about farm management. Miguel had continued, frustration finally breaking through his usual professional restraint. And now your crop is dying from a disease I recognized a week ago, but didn't mention because you made it very clear you didn't want advice from just a picker who probably never finished high school. Bill's face had gone through several expressions: shame about his treatment of Miguel, desperation about his dying crop, residual skepticism about whether Miguel could really have the expertise he claimed. Financial panic had won out over pride. "If you know what's killing my strawberries, tell me," Bill had said. "I don't care anymore whether you're qualified or not. My entire farm is going bankrupt. If there's any chance you know something that can save my crop, I need to hear it." "May I examine the diseased plants directly?" Miguel had asked. "I need to confirm my diagnosis before recommending treatment." Within 10 minutes, Miguel and I had been walking through the infected fields. Miguel examining plants with the systematic expertise of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. His assessment had been methodical and quick, inspecting root systems, checking leaf discoloration patterns, examining the internal rot in the fruit, even smelling the soil and plants in ways that seemed unusual, but apparently meant something to his trained senses. "This is Phytophthora fragariavar, tropicalis," Miguel had announced after his examination. "A rare variant of red steely disease that occurs primarily in Central American strawberry production. It's virtually unknown in California because the pathogen requires specific tropical climate conditions to establish. But you've recreated those conditions with your irrigation schedule. Excess morning moisture combined with insufficient drainage has made your soil hospitable to a pathogen that normally could not survive in temperate California agriculture. Are you certain?" Bill had asked, desperate hope mixing with continued skepticism. "Completely certain," Miguel had confirmed. "I've treated this exact disease 3 times on Salvadoran export farms. The symptom pattern is distinctive: rapid wilting, leaf discoloration with specific yellowing pattern, internal fruit rot while external appearance stays normal, progression that accelerates in morning moisture. Your UC Davis consultants wouldn't recognize it because they've never seen tropical variants of temperate diseases. But I've published research on exactly this pathogen. Can it be treated?" Bill's voice had carried every ounce of his financial desperation. "Yes, but treatment window is narrow," Miguel had explained. "The pathogen is in early reproductive phase right now. In another week, it will have sporulated throughout your entire field system and treatment will be impossible. But if we act immediately with proper fungicide combination and soil pH adjustment, we can stop the progression and save approximately 70 to 80% of your crop. What do you need?" Bill had asked, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by recognition that Miguel's expertise was the only chance to save the farm. "Specific fungicide combination that your consultants wouldn't think to use because they don't know this pathogen," Miguel had replied. "Plus immediate adjustment to irrigation schedule, soil pH modification, and targeted application procedure. I'll need to supervise personally to ensure proper coverage. If we start today, we can prevent total crop loss. If we wait for your UC Davis lab results in 2 weeks, your entire harvest will be dead." For the next 72 hours, I'd watched Miguel essentially manage Bill Morrison's entire farm operation, implementing emergency treatment protocols based on 15 years of managing exactly these situations on Salvadoran export farms. He ordered specific fungicide combinations used for tropical Phytophthora variants that California agricultural suppliers didn't normally stock, designed application procedures that targeted the specific soil depths where the pathogen was, establishing adjusted irrigation schedules to eliminate the morning moisture conditions that promoted fungal reproduction, modified soil pH using amendments that made conditions inhospitable for the pathogen while maintaining strawberry plant health, supervised application teams to ensure proper treatment coverage, and timing monitored disease progression daily to verify treatment effectiveness. His expertise had been obvious to everyone watching. This wasn't someone guessing or applying textbook knowledge. This was a master's trained agronomist with extensive field experience managing a crisis he'd handled multiple times before under worse conditions than a California farm offered. The critical factor is timing, Miguel had explained while supervising fungicide application. This pathogen reproduces in 72-hour cycles under these moisture conditions. We need to break that cycle with properly timed fungicide applications that hit the pathogen during vulnerable phases of its life cycle. Miss the timing by even 12 hours, and treatment effectiveness drops dramatically. Within a week of Miguel's intervention, the disease progression had stopped. The strawberry plants had stabilized, new growth had begun emerging healthy, and fruit production had started recovering. Bill's UC Davis consultants, who'd finally gotten lab results back confirming Miguel's diagnosis, had been stunned both by the speed of Miguel's identification and the effectiveness of his treatment protocol. He diagnosed Phytophthora frigoriavar, tropicless in 10 minutes from field observation. One consultant had said to Miguel with genuine admiration, "We needed 2 weeks of laboratory analysis to confirm what you identified visually. And your treatment protocol worked perfectly. We're seeing 95% pathogen mortality with minimal plant stress." That's exceptional disease management. I've treated this exact disease multiple times, Miguel had explained simply. When you manage tropical export farms, you learn to diagnose rare pathogens quickly because waiting for lab confirmation means losing entire harvests. Visual diagnosis and immediate treatment becomes essential survival skill. Bill guessed final crop losses had been approximately 15%, instead of the 100% total loss he'd been facing, meaning Miguel's expertise had saved roughly $1.7 million worth of strawberries. More critically, Miguel's intervention had saved Bill's farm from bankruptcy, since losing an entire year's harvest would have meant defaulting on loans and potentially losing the family farm that had been in the Morrison family for 3 generations. The transformation in Bill Morrison's attitude toward Miguel and immigrant farm workers generally had been dramatic and, from what I'd observed, genuine rather than just calculated self-interest. Bill had been forced to confront that his dumb picker, who never finished high school, was actually more qualified than the expensive specialist Bill had been consulting. And that recognition had shattered assumptions Bill had held his entire life about farm workers and agricultural expertise. "Miguel, I don't know how to apologize for months of treating you like you were stupid," Bill had said during a conversation in his office after the crisis had stabilized. "Every single time you tried to give me advice about farm management, I dismissed you because I assumed someone picking fruit couldn't possibly understand agriculture better than me. And it turns out you're more educated and more experienced than anyone I ever hired to manage this farm." "I accept your apology," Miguel had replied with the dignity he'd maintained throughout months of mockery. "But I want you to understand something important about the workers you employ. Many of us aren't just pickers. We're agronomists, agricultural engineers, farm managers from our countries. We work manual labor not because we lack education, but because American agricultural systems won't recognize our expertise while we wait years for immigration cases to resolve. That picker might be an agronomist like me." Miguel had continued. "That packing house worker might be an agricultural engineer. That field supervisor might have managed farms 10 times larger than yours. You've been judging us by our current jobs instead of understanding our jobs reflect immigration barriers and credential recognition problems, not our actual agricultural knowledge." "You're absolutely right," Bill had acknowledged. "And I'm committed to changing not just how I treat you personally, but how I approach agricultural labor generally, starting with making sure your expertise is properly recognized and compensated." Bill Guest's response had included concrete actions beyond just apologies. He dehired an immigration attorney to handle Miguel's asylum case pro bono and expedite his work authorization process. He depromoted Miguel to farm manager position with salary reflecting his actual qualifications rather than minimum wage picking rates. He defunded the credentialing process to get Miguel degrees validated by American agricultural institutions. He publicly acknowledged Miguel's expertise to agricultural associations and other farmers. He implemented a program to identify other farm workers with agricultural education and promote them to positions matching their qualifications. Bill's response had included concrete actions beyond just apologies. He dehired an immigration attorney to handle Miguel's asylum case pro bono and expedite his work authorization process. He depromoted Miguel to farm manager position with salary reflecting his actual qualifications rather than minimum wage picking rates. He defunded the credentialing process to get Miguel desk degrees validated by American agricultural institutions. He publicly acknowledged Miguel Des expertise to agricultural associations and other farmers. He de-implemented a program to identify other farm workers with agricultural education and promote them to positions matching their qualifications. He de-established a scholarship fund for children of farm workers to pursue agricultural education. I can undo months of treating Miguel and other workers with contempt. Bill had explained during a follow-up conversation, but I can use my position in California agriculture to advocate for recognizing immigrant agricultural expertise and changing how farmers view their labor force. What happened with Miguel taught me that assumptions about farm workers based on their current jobs are not just morally wrong, they're agriculturally stupid because we're wasting expertise we desperately need. The incident had generated substantial attention in California agricultural circles because crop disease rescue stories with dramatic financial stakes tend to spread quickly among farmers. Within a week, local agricultural news outlets had picked up the story about the fruit picker who was actually a master's agronomist saving a $2 million crop. By the following month, the story had appeared in national agricultural publications and immigrant advocacy media. Salvadoran agronomist working as fruit picker saves California farm from bankruptcy became one of those stories that forced agricultural communities to examine assumptions about farm workers and credential recognition. The combination of Miguel's obvious expertise, the dramatic crop rescue, Bill's public acknowledgement of his prejudice, and the clear demonstration that immigrant farm workers often possessed agricultural knowledge exceeding farm owners created exactly the kind of narrative that challenged systemic assumptions. The Miguel Ramirez case demonstrates everything wrong with how American agriculture treats immigrant expertise. Dr. Patricia Villarreal, an agricultural labor advocate, had testified during a California legislative hearing on farm worker issues. We have a master S-degree agronomist picking strawberries for minimum wage because our credentialing systems won't recognize Central American agricultural education. Then a crop disease emerges that American specialists can't identify. And Miguel saves a multi-million-dollar harvest using expertise he'd been prevented from utilizing for years. This isn't just about Miguel. Dr. Villarreal had continued. California agriculture employs thousands of farm workers who have agricultural degrees, farm management experience, and technical expertise from their home countries. We treat them as unskilled labor while complaining about agricultural labor shortages and lack of farm management talent. The disconnect between our stated need for agricultural expertise and our refusal to recognize immigrant qualifications is both economically wasteful and morally indefensible. Miguel's asylum case had been expedited with Bill's legal and financial support, and within 8 months of the crop rescue, Miguel had received refugee status, granting him permanent work authorization. His Salvadoran degrees had been validated through an accelerated credential recognition process, and several California agricultural institutions had offered him positions ranging from farm management to agricultural research to teaching roles at agricultural colleges. I cried when I got my credential validation. Miguel had told me during a phone conversation after the approval. Not just because I could practice agronomy again, but because it meant 4 years of picking fruit while my expertise went to waste were finally over. My children could see their father working as the agronomist he'd always been, rather than wondering why someone with a master's degree was doing manual labor. Miguel had accepted a position as operations manager for a consortium of organic farms in Watsonville, bringing his 15-plus years of sustainable agriculture expertise to managing multiple properties focused on environmentally responsible farming practices. His specialization in disease management without heavy pesticide use had made him particularly valuable to organic operations that needed to control pathogens while maintaining organic certification standards. Miguel is exceptional, his consortium director had commented during a performance review. His agricultural knowledge is comprehensive: soil science, pest management, disease control, sustainable practices. His diagnostic abilities are extraordinary. He can identify crop problems in minutes. That would take our consultants days to figure out. And his experience managing tropical export farms has given him perspectives on disease management that most California agronomists never develop. We're fortunate California's credentialing system finally recognized his expertise. That assessment had validated what Miguel had always known, that his Central American agricultural education and tropical farming experience had made him a highly skilled agronomist whose capabilities matched or exceeded American agricultural specialists. The years he'd spent picking strawberries hadn't been because he lacked agricultural knowledge. They'd been because systematic barriers assumed foreign agricultural education was automatically inferior. And because immigration policies created impossible situations where qualified professionals couldn't practice while waiting years for asylum approval. Bill Morrison had become an outspoken advocate for recognizing immigrant agricultural expertise and reforming credential barriers that prevented qualified agronomists from working in their actual professions. He testified at agricultural policy hearings, written op-eds about his experience, and used his position in California farming associations to push for changes in how the industry viewed and utilized immigrant workers' knowledge. I think about those months of mocking Miguel constantly. Bill had told me during a conversation 18 months after the crop rescue. Not just the financial disaster nearly caused by ignoring his warnings about irrigation creating fungal conditions, though that would have bankrupted my farm, but the casual cruelty of dismissing someone as stupid based purely on assumptions about their current job rather than their actual education or capabilities. Miguel tried to help me multiple times before the crisis, Bill had continued. He saw the conditions developing that would create disease problems. He understood the agricultural science better than my expensive consultants. But I was too arrogant and prejudiced to listen, because I couldn't imagine that someone picking fruit might know more about farming than I did. That kind of ignorant arrogance almost cost me everything. This experience fundamentally changed how I understand agricultural labor and immigrant expertise. Bill had reflected. I used to think farm workers were interchangeable manual labor, that picking fruit required no particular skill or knowledge. Now I understand that California's fields are full of agronomists, agricultural engineers, farm managers from Latin America whose expertise we re-wasting because we won't recognize their education or look past their current jobs to see their actual qualifications. The picker might be an agronomist, Bill had concluded. The field worker might be an agricultural engineer. The crew supervisor might have managed farms worth millions. And dismissing them as just labor without understanding who they actually are isn't just morally wrong, it's agriculturally stupid. Because when crop diseases or other crises emerge, those immigrants might be the only people with expertise to save your farm. Miguel's family had thrived in California after his credential recognition and professional employment. His children had excelled in school. His wife Sophia had found work as a teacher utilizing her Salvadoran education degree. And Miguel had established himself as a respected voice in California's agricultural community on issues ranging from sustainable farming to immigrant labor policy to tropical disease management. Miguel had also maintained connection to El Salvador's agricultural sector, consulting remotely for Salvadoran farms dealing with disease outbreaks and mentoring young Salvadoran agronomists pursuing careers in sustainable agriculture. He'd published updated research on tropical fungal pathogens that combined his original El Salvador experience with new knowledge gained managing California organic farms. I want my daughters and son to understand something important about our family's journey. Miguel had explained to me, we didn't leave El Salvador because we wanted better opportunities or because we were unsuccessful there. We fled because staying met death threats, from gangs that made agricultural management impossible. We came to America as refugees seeking safety, not as economic migrants seeking wealth. For 4 years, Americans saw me as just a fruit picker, Miguel had continued. They assumed I was uneducated because I did manual labor. They treated me as if my current job defined my intelligence and worth. But I was always a master's degree agronomist with extensive farm management experience. My value never changed. Only people's best perception of my value changed when circumstances forced them to recognize my actual qualifications. I want my children to remember that lesson, Miguel had added. That immigrants' current jobs often tell you nothing about their education, expertise, or capabilities. That the person picking fruit might have a master's degree. That the janitor might be an engineer. That the dishwasher might be a doctor. And that treating people with dignity and respect isn't just morally right, it's pragmatically smart. Because you never know when you might desperately need the expertise of the person whose current job you've been dismissing. 2 years after the strawberry crop rescue, Miguel had been invited to speak at agricultural conferences throughout California and nationally about sustainable disease management and the value of integrating immigrant agricultural expertise into American farming. His presentations always included his personal story, master agronomist picking fruit for 4 years. While expertise went to waste, farm owners' mockery and dismissal. Crop disease crisis that exposed hidden qualifications, dramatic rescue that saved farm from bankruptcy. The Ramirez story resonates because it challenges fundamental assumptions American farmers hold about their workers. One agricultural economist had observed, most farmers assume that people picking crops are unskilled labor with minimal education. Miguel's story forces recognition that those assumptions are often completely wrong. That farm workers frequently have more agricultural education than the farm owners employing them, and that immigrant expertise is being systematically wasted by credentialing barriers and prejudice about manual labor jobs. Bill Morrison's farm had become something of a showcase for immigrant agricultural expertise integration. Several other workers at his farm had revealed agricultural education backgrounds after Miguel's promotion, and Bill had worked to match their positions with their qualifications. The farm's productivity had increased substantially once workers with agricultural knowledge were empowered to contribute expertise rather than just manual labor. Our farm operates better now that we recognize workers' actual qualifications, Bill had explained during an agricultural confrontation. Miguel isn't the only educated agronomist who was picking fruit for us. We had an agricultural engineer from Guatemala working as an irrigator. We had a farm manager from Honduras working in our packing house. We had a soil scientist from Nicaragua operating tractors. Once we started actually asking about workers' backgrounds and matching their positions to their expertise, our agricultural outcomes improved dramatically. The lesson isn't just about treating workers ethically, though that matters, Bill had continued. It's about recognizing that agricultural success requires utilizing all available expertise, regardless of where that expertise comes from or what jobs people currently hold. American agriculture faces massive challenges: climate change, disease pressures, sustainability demands, labor shortages. We can't afford to waste the agricultural knowledge that immigrant workers bring just because our systems don't recognize their credentials, or we assume manual labor means lack of education. Now, before I wrap up Miguel's story here, in this farm office where I am finishing the last of my security documentation, let me take a moment to say something important. If you're refinding value in this story about an agronomist forced to pick fruit while his master's degree expertise went to waste for 4 years, do Uncle Sam a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories about highly qualified immigrant professionals working manual labor while facing mockery from people who have no idea about their actual education. Drop a comment telling me if you've witnessed similar situations in agriculture. Agronomists picking crops, agricultural engineers doing field labor, farm managers working minimum wage jobs because credentials aren't recognized. These stories matter because they challenge assumptions about farm workers and remind US that the people harvesting our food often understand agriculture better than the farmers employing them. Miguel Guest's story has become a powerful advocacy tool precisely because it demonstrates so clearly how credential barriers and prejudice about manual labor doing just harm immigrants. They endanger the agricultural operations that depend on quickly identifying and treating crop diseases. A farmer can mock his stupid picker for months and then discover that picker is the only person who can save 2 million Australian dollars crop from a disease American specialists can't even identify. The Ramirez case opened conversations about agricultural credential recognition that advocacy organizations had been trying to start for years. Dr. Villarreal had told me. Suddenly, farmers were willing to listen to arguments about recognizing Central American agricultural education because Bill S. story demonstrated so dramatically that dismissing farm workers' expertise can literally bankrupt your operation. Sometimes individual stories break through where policy arguments alone can't. But Dr. Villarreal had also emphasized the limitations of relying on dramatic crop rescues for credential reform. For every Miguel who got his moment of vindication when Bill's strawberries were dying, there are thousands of immigrant agronomists whose expertise never gets recognized. Because farmers never face crises that force acknowledgement of their workers' hidden qualifications. They just quietly pick fruit or do field labor until they give up, age out of their agricultural knowledge, or accept that America will never recognize their education. Those agronomists matter too, even without dramatic crop rescue stories to prove their worth. As I packed up my security equipment and prepared to leave Morrison Farms, having completed my assessment, and witnessed one of the most dramatic demonstrations of immigrant expertise I'd ever seen, I reflected on how Miguel Jeff's journey from farm management in El Salvador to fruit picking in California to recognize. Agronomist again captured something essential about immigrant professional experience in America. The expertise had always been there. Miguel was the same master's degree agronomist, whether he was managing export farms in El Salvador, picking strawberries in Watsonville, or consulting for California organic operations. What changed was whether systems and people could see past his current job to recognize that expertise and allow him to use it. And critically, what changed was whether farmers understood that the manual laborers they dismissed and mocked might possess agricultural knowledge that could literally save their operations when crises emerged. The lesson stays with me. Agricultural expertise and current farm jobs are often completely disconnected for immigrant workers, especially refugees and asylum applicants. The person picking your strawberries might have a master's degree in agronomy. The field worker might have managed farms worth millions. The crew supervisor might understand tropical diseases better than your agricultural consultants. And dismissing those workers as uneducated based on their manual labor jobs can literally cost you everything when crop diseases strike that only immigrant professionals have experience treating. So drop a comment and tell me what you think about how agriculture treats immigrant expertise and whether you've witnessed qualified agronomists working harvest jobs. Have you seen situations where farm workers had more agricultural education than farm managers? Have you met immigrants whose agricultural degrees weren't recognized while they did manual labor? Share your city and country, and let us have real conversations about these issues that affect thousands of agricultural professionals and ultimately impact food production and farm viability when expertise goes to waste. Special thanks to Eduardo Silva from Salinas, California, and Maria Gonzalez from Fresno, California, who've been engaging consistently with our videos. Eduardo, your comment about your father, who is an agricultural engineer in Mexico but works as an irrigator here, really connected with viewers. Maria, appreciate you sharing how your uncle who managed coffee plantations in Colombia works in a packing house because credentials aren't recognized. Keep those stories coming because they remind people that agricultural workers often have more expertise than the operations employing them. The lesson from Miguel S. story remains crystal clear. Agricultural expertise doesn't disappear because of manual labor jobs or immigration status. Professional competence can't be measured by current employment in the fields. And assumptions about farm workers based on their jobs rather than their actual education can literally bankrupt your farm when crop diseases emerge that only immigrant agronomists have training to identify. Miguel Ramirez was an exceptional agronomist, whether he was managing export farms in El Salvador or picking strawberries in California. The only thing that changed was whether people could see past his fruit picking job, to recognize the master's degree expertise that would eventually save Bill Morrison's entire operation. Because at the end of the day, American agriculture has a choice. We can continue dismissing farm workers as unskilled labor while complaining about agricultural expertise shortages. We can mock immigrants for having accents and doing manual work without recognizing they might have master's degrees and decades of farm management experience. We can maintain credential barriers that force qualified agronomists to pick fruit for years while their expertise goes to waste. Or we can reform these systems to actually assess agricultural competence. Recognize Central American agricultural education that often exceeds American training in tropical disease management. And stop judging farm workers by their current jobs rather than their actual qualifications. Bill Morrison learned that lesson in the most dramatic and expensive way possible, watching his $2 million crop dying while the dumb picker he democked for months turned out to be the only person who could identify and treat the disease, threatening to bankrupt 3 generations of family farming. That near catastrophe should have been unnecessary. Miguel's expertise should have been recognized from the beginning, not just after an emergency-forced acknowledgement that the fruit picker understood agriculture better than anyone else on the farm. For every Miguel who gets vindication when crops start dying, there are hundreds who quietly pick fruit until they give up, who age out of their agricultural knowledge while waiting for credentials that never get recognized, who accept that American agriculture will waste their expertise because credential systems value protectionism over competence. Those agronomists who stay harvesting crops, those agricultural engineers who keep doing field labor, those farm managers whose knowledge dies unused, they represent the real cost of judging farm workers by their current jobs rather than recognizing their agricultural education and experience that could transform American farming if we do just look past our prejudices. All right, bro. It's time for this old man to finish these reports and head back to my hotel. Tomorrow I got another agricultural operation to assess in Salinas. And who knows, maybe I'll meet another fruit picker who's actually an agronomist. Another field worker who's actually an agricultural engineer. Because if Miguel's story taught me anything, is that California best fields are immigrant agricultural expertise that we be systematically wasting because we can't see past manual labor jobs to recognize degrees and professional experience that could save American farms from exactly the kinds of crises that almost bankrupted Bill Morrison. Thanks for staying with Uncle Sam through Miguel and Bill S. story about that Watson Mill strawberry farm where one owner learned the hardest possible way that the dumb picker who never finished high school was actually a master's degree agronomist whose expertise saved the farm from complete financial ruin. Stay humble out there. Recognize that farm workers often understand agriculture better than farm owners. And remember that assumptions about people based on their current jobs rather than their actual education can literally cost you millions when crop diseases emerge that only immigrant professionals know how to treat. Until next time, bro.